He was once called the Queen's favourite son, a royal with charm, privilege and power. But now, he's the man the palace can't seem to get rid of. At 65, Prince Andrew's life has turned into a royal nightmare, a story of arrogance, entitlement, and secrets that refuse to stay buried. And as the public demands answers about his wealth, his titles, and even his mansions, one question keeps echoing across the nation. How did a prince with everything end up being the family's biggest problem? Long before the scandals, long before the headlines turned toxic, Prince Andrew was the royal everyone expected to shine. Born into privilege, raised in palaces, and surrounded by the weight of centuries of tradition, he seemed destined for greatness. The press called him confident. The public saw a charming young man who'd earned his place in the spotlight through military service and royal duty. But behind that polished smile was something else, a quiet belief that the rules didn't apply to him. He basked in the luxury of his royal life, the cars, the travel, the global recognition that came with his title. And for a while, people celebrated it. He was the action prince, the daring one, the face of a modern monarchy that still carried old-world glamour. But power, once tasted, can be addictive, and those early moments of fame began to shape the man who would later divide the nation. Insiders say, even then, his confidence often slipped into arrogance. He wasn't just representing the royal family, he believed he was the royal family. Every room, every event, every handshake was his stage, and the applause only fed that sense of invincibility. To the outside world, it was the picture of royal success. Inside the palace walls, though, whispers were growing. And soon, those whispers would turn into something impossible to ignore.
As years passed, the royal glow that once surrounded Prince Andrew began to fade, replaced by something far less flattering. Behind palace doors, staff whispered about his temper, his impatience, and his belief that royal privilege gave him a free pass. To him, the world wasn't about service or duty, it was about status, and that mindset followed him everywhere he went. There were stories of lavish spending, questionable business ties, and an appetite for luxury that went far beyond what his role required. He mingled with billionaires, accepted extravagant gifts, and built connections that raised eyebrows even within the royal family. Every headline chipped away at the image of a dutiful prince, replacing it with something more unsettling, a man out of touch with reality, yet unwilling to admit it. Then came the housing issue, the moment that turned whispers into outrage. While the monarchy faced growing public scrutiny over spending, Andrew was quietly living in the Royal Lodge, a sprawling 30-room mansion on the Windsor estate. He claimed it was his right, a reward for years of service, but the details painted a different picture. Reports surfaced that he'd invested millions into renovations and was now paying a token rent, a so-called peppercorn rate. To many, it looked like he was living large on privilege alone, while the rest of the country tightened its belt. Even worse, he wasn't just fighting to keep the mansion, he wanted another home for his ex-wife, Sarah Ferguson. A divorced couple living together in royal luxury, demanding 2 properties funded by the Crown's estate. It felt less like tradition and more like entitlement turned spectacle. But the housing drama was just the surface. Beneath it was a far deeper problem, one that no amount of royal protocol could contain. because soon his personal connections and questionable friendships would explode into public view, and the fallout would be unlike anything the palace had faced in decades.
The real turning point came when whispers became headlines and headlines became outrage. What started as talk of bad judgment soon evolved into something darker, accusations that shook the very foundation of the monarchy. Prince Andrew's long-standing friendship with disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein turned from a rumor into a public disaster. For years he brushed it off, insisting he'd done nothing wrong, that he was simply unlucky in his choice of friends. But the photos, the timelines, the connections, they told a different story. Suddenly, the Queen's favorite son became a national embarrassment. Newspapers ran front-page spreads, late-night hosts mocked him, and the palace went silent, a silence that said more than any official statement could. Then came the interview, the one that would haunt him forever. Sitting down with the BBC's Newsnight, Andrew tried to clear his name, but instead of defending his reputation, he destroyed it. Every awkward smile, every strange denial, every attempt to explain away his behavior made the public's disbelief turn into fury. In a single broadcast, decades of royal prestige evaporated. Soon after, lawsuits followed, accusations resurfaced, settlements were made, and questions about where the money came from grew louder. He continued to maintain his innocence, even as the public's patience ran out. Protests outside palaces, headlines calling him the disgraced Duke, and commentators describing him as the royal family's biggest liability. The palace moved swiftly to distance itself. His military titles were stripped, his public duties gone. Officially, he had stepped back from royal life, but everyone knew the truth. He'd been forced out. Still, Andrew refused to fade quietly into the background. He continued to live in royal comfort, still insisting he'd done nothing wrong. But by then, the court of public opinion had already ruled against him, and the sentence was clear: exile, not redemption. Yet, even as the dust settled, a new controversy was brewing, one that would drag his name right back into the headlines. Because this time, it wasn't about who he knew, it was about where he lived. You'd think that after everything, the interviews, the lawsuits, the exile from public life, Prince Andrew would have quietly stepped away, accepted his fate, and disappeared into the background. But that's not how this story goes. Because even stripped of titles and public roles, he's still living like royalty and still creating headlines the palace desperately wishes would vanish. The latest controversy, his housing battle. After being asked to leave Royal Lodge, the massive 30-room mansion on the Windsor estate, Andrew reportedly refused unless he was guaranteed 2 new homes, one for himself and another for his ex-wife, Sarah Ferguson. Yes, the same ex-wife who still lives with him decades after their divorce. He claimed it was only fair, that he had invested millions in renovations and deserved compensation. But to the public, it sounded like a prince clinging to privilege, demanding more when he'd already lost almost everything. While King Charles and Prince William push to modernize the monarchy, Andrew's behavior drags it back into scandal. Rumors swirl that officials are investigating his finances, asking how he manages to maintain such an extravagant lifestyle on a modest naval pension. Some even call him the monarchy's greatest liability, the shadow that won't leave the palace walls. And the public reaction? Pure disbelief. As ordinary families face rising costs and the nation questions the relevance of royalty, the image of a disgraced prince fighting to keep luxury homes feels almost insulting. Every headline about him, from Frogmore Cottage to Royal Lodge, becomes another reminder that accountability in the royal world doesn't always look like it does everywhere else. Within the palace, frustration runs deep. Privately, some say he's the problem that won't go away. Others call him a living reminder of everything the modern monarchy is trying to forget. But Andrew doesn't seem ready to give up. Not his comfort, not his title, and certainly not his sense of royal privilege. Still, power and reputation don't last forever. And as the walls close in, even he must realize that the crown he once wore with pride has become the weight pulling him down. Because in the end, this story isn't just about property or status. It's about what happens when someone who once had everything refuses to let go of the past. Once upon a time, he was the pride of the palace, the daring prince who could do no wrong. Today, he's the reminder of everything the monarchy wishes it could forget. From charm to controversy, from admiration to exile, Prince Andrew's story feels less like a royal chapter and more like a cautionary tale. Because at its core, this isn't just about wealth or privilege, it's about denial. A man convinced that titles protect him even as the world moves on. He's 65 now, still clinging to his mansion, still fighting for relevance, still insisting he's the victim of a misunderstanding. But the truth is, the world has already made up its mind. Every time his name returns to the headlines, it reignites a question the royal family can't escape. How long can tradition survive when those born to represent it refuse to change? For many, Prince Andrew represents the old system, one built on entitlement, insulated from consequence. And maybe that's why his story resonates so deeply, even with those who claim not to care about royalty. Because it isn't just a royal scandal, it's a story about what happens when power becomes habit and accountability never quite arrives. The palace can try to move forward, new faces, new headlines, new hope, but in the background the echoes remain. And no matter how many homes he secures or how many titles he loses, one truth will always follow him. You can leave the crown, but you can't escape the consequences.